welcome to Cure America. I'm Star Parker. Last week, in a 6-3 decision, the United States Supreme Court lifted California's ban on indoor worship services. This ruling lifted California's strict orders on churches that violated the Constitution's protection of the free exercise of religion. This is one victory of many lawsuits that churches have brought in the face of shutdowns and mandated restrictions by governors who continue to wield power over churches during this pandemic, while some have declared abortion clinics, marijuana dispensaries, casinos, and liquor stores to be essential services. Well, I'm going to start this discussion, why is your church closed, with Jonathan, because you had a major victory, Liberty Counsel. You guys were the ones that took this case up to the court from California to say, why are you forcing us closed? Tell us about it.
Right, so this is our second case in front of the Supreme Court. Of course, Governor Newsom for the past almost year has shut down and had a total ban on any in-person worship in California. And these rules have been some of the most onerous, unconstitutional restrictions on worship, completely going against anything the First Amendment stands for, completely going against anything that jurisprudence in America up until this time has allocated for. The rights of an individual to worship their God according to the dictates of their heart and do so in a gathering. Well, we fought this case, and we fought it on behalf of Harvest International Ministry and Harvest Rock Church.
Yeah, Harvest are good churches.
Yeah,
I know them. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So Pastor Cheon, he's incredible personal figure and has a great ministry in California. And we're able to get a 6-3 decision from the court. The conservative judges entirely sided with our argument, effectively saying that Governor Newsom and his onerous laws weren't allowed to restrict individuals from worshiping. He had a total ban on worship, where you couldn't even worship with individuals within your home. And thankfully, the justices landed on the right side of the law in this case. And I think it's a perspective, right? If we're looking at our constitutional rights, or the Bill of Rights, as merely just a la carte buffet menus that we can pick and choose at what time we want to enforce it, then of course anytime government stands against it, we'll back down. But if we look at those Bill of Rights as actual duties, instead of saying we have the free exercise, well, maybe we have the duty of worship, the duty to show up on Sunday morning at 11 a.m. and make sure we're rendering praise to God. We have the duty to push back against tyrannical governments, the duty to make sure that every individual has equal protection under law. If we start trading out some of these words of rights and looking at them as duties, we'll remember that, yes, our first priority, the founding of this country, was to preserve religious liberty. And no government official, whether it's a governor, whether it's an unelected Department of Health official, has the right to dictate to churches when and where or how they can worship. Randy Jackson is able to be on Name That Tune, but you can't have Charles Billingsley sing Amazing Grace at Shadow Mountain Church. And that's the inconsistency of the application that we're calling out and saying discrimination. There are 29 pages, single-spaced, of businesses, organizations, entertainment facilities that are exempt from the governor's order. So they were able to meet, they were able to go about and carry on their business. It was churches that were isolated and basically put on the chopping block, saying that you cannot operate in the way that you want to. And to a point that you made earlier, the gap that the church fills and occupies in terms of reaching out to the poor. One of the churches that we represent in Maine was their target mission were to former drug addicts and former prostitutes, former ladies of the night that would find in that church a refuge, a place that they could make their bed at night and stay off the streets, but also wake up in the morning and go to worship. Wow. The governor of Maine said that they were allowed to sleep in cots downstairs, but as soon as they came upstairs and worshiped, that was in violation. And it's that sort of discriminatory manner that these governors are going about putting these onerous regulations on churches that we do have to fight against. Right? Think of who we've yielded our authority to. Instead of the Bible dictating who's in charge, it's, right, does this fit with the science, is what we've always been hearing. Does this fit with the science? And these are scientists, by and large, that would say creationism is false. They'd deny creationism. Yep. They'd certainly deny the resurrection, but now we're putting them in charge and linking our church websites to their websites and saying they're going to be the authority on how and where and when we can worship. And they have no regard for our faith, no regard for the foundational tenets of Christianity, yet they're dictating how we express that. So we represent 2,000 churches. 2,000? In 44 states, actively. There are 6 states that basically did the right thing very early on, Florida and Texas and such, but in 44 states, and our attorneys are up 3 in the morning. These judges not only have no regard for Sunday morning, they have no regard for Sabbath. Sabbath. They'll issue their judgments, in the middle of the night at 1 a.m. is when this 6-3 decision came down. And so we're up around the clock fighting with these churches. Thankfully, it's not every church that has yielded the authority.
This is not fair what we're doing to the most broken and vulnerable.
Yes. It was as if Scripture said, I was glad when they said to me, let us go into the house of the Lord. I mean, it's there in Scripture and it's there for a reason. In addition to the other 50 or so one another principles that we have in Scripture, things that you can only do in person, laying hands on each other, greeting each other with a holy kiss, things that, listening under the teaching of a pastor that's elevated on a pulpit as were prescribed in the Old Testament. There are things that are so distinct to the church ministry. And in addition to that, the one place at 11 a.m. that you could find 100 million Americans that would be preaching the word. That's where you got your political direction from. That's where you got your cultural insight from. That's where you dealt with your family issues. Everything that God gave us in terms of how to conduct our lives, the pastor was there able to shepherd us from the pulpit. But now you have, folks comfortable, as you said, not willing to enter back into the fold. And then you have government saying, well, you can't.
But what are pastors going to do to rally them up to get them back? Is this going to happen?
Well, I was going to say, I think instructive of what we've seen, one of the churches that we represent in Chicago is a church that's established mainly from folks that are first-generation immigrants from Romania. So they were under communist rule up until December 20, on Christmas Day, 1989.
Where they couldn't have any church.
They couldn't have any church whatsoever. And they unselfishly decided to be the front runners in Illinois and saying, no, we're not going to close churches. We'll take every precaution that we can take because no one can love our members more than we can. Nevertheless, we're going to show up because we can see down the road what happens next. What happened next in Romania was that they disallowed us to worship completely.
Wow.
But they said it was for our benefit initially. They said this was for the common good initially, but then ultimately had an imposition where they couldn't worship at all. So what happens next if we don't stand up? We'll be like communist nations. We'll be like that church escaped in Romania.
Look, I don't want to close, and so I need an advocate. Are they the missionaries now and saying, no, I'm keeping this work going?
And I do appreciate the pastors from the outset that said we just can't close. We don't have the option not to stand behind the pulpit and execute our duties.
I love it.
I appreciate the elders that got together and said, we have to care for the flock physically. We're responsible to be aware of what's going on, but our primary goal is to care for the flock spiritually, and we have to make sure that we're providing a venue for individuals to come in, to lay their burdens down at the altar, to be able to have hands laid on them and receive the healing that only the church can do.
That's right.
And it's statistical. The polls have said last year that every major group that was polled has seen a decline in depression, that their mental health has gone down. Every group, regardless of race, regardless of political affiliation. The only group that saw an increase in their mental health, the only group that came out on the other side of this feeling better about life, were those that attended church in person. So if you want to look at the facts, the church...
The science.
Yeah, exactly. If science is any indication, it shows that, once again, the church is there for an absolute reason and should remain open.
Okay.
And
that sounds like a really good
And how much they work in conjunction with one another.
Yeah.
And it's from the founding. The founders came here and said, no, government, you won't tell me that I have to worship a certain way,
right,
but you also can't tell me that I won't worship at all. And there have been court cases like the Everson v. Board of Education that have said that you can't force a person to worship, but you also can't prohibit them from worshiping as well.
I think that government has made so many promises to make people so comfortable where they are. I think that in this technological age, you can be so comfortable that there might not be a desperation. There might not be a call, only from people that have experienced it in countries that we haven't had to yet. And I'm praying that we don't have to, but we have to do more than pray. We have to keep talking about it, bringing information to you about it. Thank you, panel, for helping us do that. And I'll be right back with a final thought on this issue.